Hi and welcome to ER in Arabic. I'm Mohammed, and this talk here will be mainly in English. Although it's ER in Arabic, but this is directed to those of you who are planning to have a veterinary clinic open or buy a veterinary clinic in the US or Canada. Um, Really quick here, this channel here is educational channel. It's totally free, and it was providing veterinarians with more of more of the hands-on and clinical experience that I see or deal with in clinics. And in this chapter here, we wanted to have a detailed talk about the business part of our job. They don't really teach us that a lot in the school, but I figured if I have a playlist of multiple videos, they'll all be in English because this is directed to those of you who are willing to open up a clinic in the US or in Canada. Really quick here, I used to be a co-owner and co-founder of a referral hospital in Canada, and we owned this for a while. We basically opened it up from the scratch, and we ended up selling the practice and moved on after that. And so in the playlist here and the videos that I'll be posting here, it will be more giving different ideas, hoping to make this easier for those of you who are planning to open up a clinic either from the scratch or buy an existing clinic. So we'll be talking strictly about the business part in these videos in here. I kind of like put some ideas here that I want to talk about, but I'll give you an idea of what these ideas would be, and later on we'll be talking in details about every aspect. Basically, as I mentioned, it will be in English just because it will be directed to those of you in the US or Canada. We'll try to talk some of the stuff that we'll be talking about, like whether or not you should just work for a veterinary practice or own your own practice. Part of that will be, okay, well, if you decide to own your own practice, should you buy or should you establish? So should you buy an existing clinic or should you just establish a clinic from the scratch? And then we'll be talking about each option of these. Also, the types of clinic that you could do, it can be starting from the vaccination clinic, mobile clinic, general practice, late hours, urgent care they call it sometimes, emergency and or specialty. So these are the different kinds of clinics, and they'll be talking about most of these and in details as well later. We'll also be talking about like buying a clinic versus selling your own clinic at some point. So if you end up buying a clinic, how you look at the potential of this clinic. Like, let's say if you decide that you do not want to open a clinic from the scratch, if this is not the best option for you and you want to just establish one, you want to buy rather than establishing one, just buy a clinic that's existing. We'll talk about the potential, the analysis, the financial statements. We'll talk about the balance sheet, the current staff, the transition, and why the seller would want to sell to you, not with a corporate like a bigger company. Same thing when you're selling a clinic as well, right? So we'll talk about all these and how to evaluate the financial statements and where numbers should be, like when it comes to employer, for example, like employment, what number should the percentage of the income that should be, and the inventory percentage. We'll talk a lot about the financial statement as well when it comes to the point to talk about that, the time to talk about that. We'll also compare the working versus owning a clinic. So is this really the best thing for you to work somewhere, or is it best for you to own? And so we'll talk about the salary, the goodwill of the clinic. We'll talk about the duties, the responsibilities, the risk, the peace of mind, scheduling, the business aspect, and the experience. So it's like, when can you open a clinic, or should you just have to wait a little bit? We'll also talk about the new versus existing. We'll talk about the risk of buying a clinic versus establishing your own. So the risk to the employees that you will be inheriting, the clients as well, how is the income when it comes to like like a steady income that will start the next day as soon as you buy it versus when you establish. So we'll talk about these in details as well when time comes. We'll talk about the location of the practice, if the location that you're choosing is the good location, or if it's not really the best location you should be taking, or the space that you'll be taking. We'll talk about the difference between the exposure, the location, and the exposure and the accessibility. So how accessible that place is. Does it have to be accessible easily, or is it that not a great deal? Like, would you rather give up an exposure to a location or accessibility? So we'll talk about the difference in all of these. We'll talk about the square footage and how much or how big do you need the space? How big of a space do you need? We'll also talk about the design, how to design. Let's say if you find a space and you want to take that space, rent it out, how to design the internal design. Then we'll come to talk about the lease. Like if you end up finding a space in a plaza, how to talk about the lease, how to negotiate the lease with the landlord, because what's LOI and what should be written in the LOI, what is binding and what's not binding in the LOI, what's the deposit that you have to pay, how much tenant improvement should you ask for, because when you rent a place, the landlord normally would give you a TI, so it's called tenant improvement. We'll talk about the hours. Like basically in here, we'll be talking about everything in the rent, what you should see in there, what you should avoid, and what is like deal breaker items or deal breaker terms that you cannot accept. Because when you sign a binding lease, you signed it for 10 years. You're liable for that lease for 10 years. We'll also talk about like personal guarantees and all these things, right? We'll talk about whether or not you should use a lawyer. Well, you should use a lawyer for sure, but when to use a lawyer and how to choose a lawyer for the lease itself. We'll talk also about the corporate structure. So it's super important when you plan a veterinary clinic is you plan it right, especially when it comes to accounting. We all have to pay tax, right? It's very important to be tax efficient, right? So you don't expose, for example, like there's several structures where you can benefit from some exemptions that are out there. So, for example, in Canada, there is a capital gain exemption that you can be eligible for if you have some criteria, right? Not only you, but in some provinces, it will be you and your family as well. So how can you set that up appropriately? So if you end up, after so many years, you find out that you can't keep going with the clinic and you end up selling the clinic, how can you get all these benefits that can benefit you and your family when it comes to appropriate allocation of the sale price? Same thing will happen to dividends as well. So some provinces will allow you to have shares sold to or owned by a non-veterinarian. Some wouldn't, right? So it's super important that you do the appropriate setup when it comes to shares and who owns the shares and how do you do the share structure. And if you, for example, you can involve something called a family trust, and you can do that in Canada. And a family trust basically can own some of the shares of the clinic. So it is, we'll talk about all these in details, but you have to do the right setup. It's just as important as doing everything else in the business, because you don't want to be in a category, on a bracket where you're buying really, really high taxes. If you can set it up appropriately and pay appropriate taxes, or be as much efficient as possible, and of course doing everything legally, by the books, right? We'll also what else here? Okay, next, yeah, we'll talk about taxes, how to plan, and what can go on the expenses and what cannot go, and what you shouldn't put in there. We'll also talk about partnership, right? So let's say if there are two of you that want to open up a clinic together, if there are three of you, okay, so we'll talk about partnership. It's like marriage, right? So you really have to choose the right partner, and you hope it works. Okay, so we'll also talk about the USA agreement. So the USA agreement, it's basically uh, it's basically like an agreement where you uh, it puts the rules between the two partners. So it basically controls what each partner can do and what cannot do, and it deals mainly with the 4Ds. They call it 4Ds. So it's like a disagreement if the two of you disagree on something, disability, death, and divorce. Right. So it deals with all these situations which can happen to any partners. Right. How to get over this. Uh, it also we'll also talk in there about the insurance and so many things in there. And one of the things here, it's the gunshot clause. I think they call it gunshot clause or something like that, where basically in case the two partners disagree and one of them want to sell, how can you sell? Like, let's say if the two of us own a clinic and I offer my partner, like X amount of dollars to buy it, which is like really cheap to the current fair value. And then he can come back and say, oh, okay, if this is what you want to offer me, I will pay you the same amount and buy your share. So this way, it will be, both of us will be certain that when I offer him or her a payout, that payout will be very fair to the point where I'll be willing to accept that payout and get rid of the shares. I've seen so many clinics, so many partners before having so much hard time. They don't even talk to each other sometimes, and that affect the clinic and the business significantly, right? I've seen this before. So it's super important that we do it, you do it the right way. We'll talk about equipment, like where and how and when to buy equipment, and how can you get some of these equipments for free, actually, right? If you do some contracts or deals with some of the companies, they can give you some of this equipment for free as far as you buy certain things from them over a certain time. We also talk about what can you buy when it comes to new versus used equipment. So there are some equipment out there that it's definitely okay to buy used. One of them for sure is the ultrasound machine, right? Like I never owned a new ultrasound machine. I always bought the used ones, but I always had maintenance agreement on them. Right, so I had them inspected by the company who manufactured it, and they told me, oh, okay, so it's not really like a used, it's like more like a barely used, or like almost looks like new, and then I buy a contract with it. So we'll talk, for example, that's an example only, right? But something like X-ray machine, I never would buy a used X-ray machine. I'm talking about like the DR system or the CR system, right? So there are things that you definitely can buy new, things that you really have to buy used, and things that you have to buy new. We'll also talk about like where to get the other stuff from and what's good and what's not good. Can you buy it from overseas? Can you buy it from China? And if you do, how? And what's the what other people that got into mistakes, like for example, someone who bought some equipment from China, it was really good quality, but some of these equipment did not were not approved to work in Canada, for example. So they could not use anything that has to do with electric in there. For example, like the surgery light, they could not get that to approve. They couldn't get the city to approve the installation of the surgery light that came from China, just because they did not have that certain, I guess, an inspection. So how to avoid that? Get the inspection done in China before you buy it, if you were to go to China to buy it, or you can decide to buy from here, right? But anyways, we'll talk in details when it comes to equipment, where and what and how. How to get the funds now, right? So let's say if you have some funds, you have some cash, but you don't have enough cash, so how to get the rest of the funds. When it comes to lease, there are options. Obviously, some people go take loans, some people take leases, and we'll talk about the difference between both of these. And some people have cash or like savings in their banks. Websites, we'll talk about the websites as well, like how computer in general, like how to get the domain, what phone number to how to get the phone numbers, how many lines, fax to email. We'll talk about the Facebook and Google pay per click. We'll talk about the search engine optimization, SEO, the reviews, how to deal with the reviews if someone leaves a bad review for you. There's a lot that we should talk about. Okay. We'll talk also about hiring and firing. So how to get staff, where to get staff from, how to get good staff, and how important is it to get the good and the right staff? Because maybe you'll have like, it's not just about getting the staff and trying them out, because it doesn't work that way. Losing a staff member is something really big, and not just because you're gonna get another one. No, just think about like how long it took you to train these people, and like to get a new person, and the mistakes that they can do while they're in training, and what's that going to cost you. So there's so many things that we're going to talk about the staff. We're going to also talk about their obligations, like what are you required to make available for the staff, how to pay them, the overtime pay, the 401k if you're in the States, or the RRSP in Canada. I'll talk about their pet discount, the holiday pay, the contract itself. Like the contract is super important to have a contract, so it tells them and tells you what's the obligation of each party. It also, you have to have other than the contracts, you have to have a hospital policy and hospital employment manual. So you have to have a manual where everyone reads and sign this manual. They know exactly what they have to do. This is a legal document. You cannot hire anyone without a contract and a signed manual, because once you turn around and you find that this person has done something really bad and you need to get rid of them, and firing them will make you really liable here. They can sue you and you can be in trouble, and you find that you have to pay them back for that just because you did a wrongful dismissal. Wrongful dismissal is called if you don't have the right dismissal or the right firing or the right way to get rid of them if they did something bad. Even if they did something bad, you didn't write it down. So sometimes it doesn't go by common sense. Sometimes they use things to go after you, like common law. In Canada they use common law. They say, okay, well, put the hospital manual aside, put the contract aside, and let's deal with the common law. So we'll also talk about that, all the regulations affecting the the relation between you and your employees, right? Get paid. So how do you get paid? Like, should you get cash, accept checks, accept credit card, and all these things? So how can you get paid, right? So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about insurances, like you have to have business insurance. We'll talk about the WCB, the work compensation insurance. We'll talk about the health insurance when it comes to health plans, dental and vision, and all these things. We'll talk about life insurance as well. Software, we'll talk about the software, which software you should get, and which one I personally have used. And I'll give you my advice on the ones that I've used only. There are several, but they're not all what's out there. There's also some newer things that are coming out in the market with like artificial intelligence and stuff like that. It's crazy how that is developing. But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the inventory, the startup inventory, the maintenance, and the what should you get in the beginning, how to make sure that they're not expiring on you, and how to deal with the controlled substance, because you'll be in trouble when it comes to that. Medical records, we'll also talk about that in details. I don't be talking forever here, but we'll talk in details about medical records and communication, and how to avoid getting in trouble, basically, right? So how to keep that good communication going, and how to record everything that you've done into the medical records. Part of that as well, we'll talk about the hiring overseas people. So let's say if you want to get a vet or a tech from overseas, how can you do that? How can you how's the process of getting that? Because you can get people from overseas. Sometimes it solves a lot of so many problems when you do that. You have shortage in vets or shortage in techs. You actually can get them in US or in Canada legally, and have them obtain a work visa, and then have them go through the license process, or they can do that before or during sometimes. We also will talk about the scheduling, how to do the schedule, how to do the appointment book. So either the schedule for the staff, or the schedule for the appointments. Okay, We'll try to say how to to do it appropriately, where you're not like having so much vacant time, like empty time, and no one is showing up, and you have so many staff not knowing what to do. And sometimes we'll be like you're having so many appointments or so many cases coming at the same time, and you don't really have the enough staff to deal with these. So this is mainly what we were hoping to talk about. I'm expecting this to have like maybe, I'd say like maybe around 20 videos that will be talking about each of these items. Hopefully we get over that, but I'm hoping that this will give us a good plan of on how to plan to either own or buy or establish a veterinary clinic, and how to run it effectively and efficiently. That's basically it, and hoping to see you again in the next videos. Have a good day. Bye.